Welcome to episode 17 of the Alcon Maddox War Plan webinar series. I'm Richard Ritchie. Today I'm excited to be joined by Dean Ryan, who is not only a fellow Welshman, but he's one of the UK's top leadership development experts and director of IF Development. So say hello, Dean.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, nice to see you all. Although I can't.
Although it's the morning where you are, I think, right?
It is, yeah, 10 o'clock in the morning.
Excellent. Okay, look, so for those of you who don't know me already, as I said, my name is Richard Ritchie. I run a company called Alcon Maddox, which is a niche recruitment and executive search firm based here in the UAE. We specialize in sourcing IT sales leadership for the IT channel industry. And that for us spans computer software, IT and services, computer network security, computer networking, telecommunications, and the internet industries. And we operate both here in the UAE and also in Singapore. Typical roles that we fill for clients include sales managers, heads of sales, directors of sales, VPs of sales, and of course, channel and partnership management roles within the channel. Now, having spent the last 25 years building and leading high-performing sales teams, I know just how important it is to install the right sales leader within an organization. This not only has a direct impact on how quickly you can penetrate a new market or open a new channel, but also how well you can protect revenues in times of crisis like today. Over the past few months, we've helped a number of organizations recruit sales leaders remotely. So if any of you on the call today would like to gain insights into our talent targeting system that helps clients identify and attract the top 15% of passive talent in the market, just put the word talent in the chat box and I'll reach out, or either myself or one of my team will reach out to you after this session for a quick introductory call. Now, that said, today is not about me, nor is it about recruitment. It's actually about you, and I'm specifically now talking to sales and commercial leaders across the IT channel industry. Now, Alcon Maddox has spoken to a number of you on the call today to get a better sense of what your top of mind challenges are in this time of COVID-19. And some of you have already become part of our mastermind community, which has really been set up to tackle this crisis head on from a business perspective. Now, these top of mind challenges are really what's been driving the content of this webinar series. And this is not only our way of giving back to the community, but it's an attempt really to bring the community together so that we may support each other in this time of crisis, but also to set ourselves up for massive growth as we begin to emerge from this troubling period. Over the last 6 months, we've already covered topics like increased threat to cybersecurity born out of working from home, fast-tracking digital transformation, solving business problems with AI, change management, and how do companies remain relevant. Each week, we bring in different industry experts to help us piece together strategies to overcome these very real challenges, and this week is no different. All of these strategies have now been compiled in the form of a white paper, so if you'd like to see this, please stay to the end of today's session and I'll give you more details on how you can obtain a copy. So the focus of today's session is techniques to improve sales performance. And there really is there's no better person to guide us through this than Dean Ryan, of course. But before you do that, Dean, for the benefit of those on the call that don't know you, can you why don't you start by just giving us a quick insight into who you are?
Okay, well, I'm Dean. I work for a company called IF Development. We're a team of business coaches. We've been in business now for just over 16 years. And we've been very fortunate to work with some great people in a wide variety of industries and organizations. So from companies like Sony, who we do an awful lot with and have had a 16-year relationship, British Airways, British Telecom, and even as far as things like the Welsh Sevens squad, Welsh Athletic squad. So we've been involved in Formula One, whole raft. But I guess the way to describe what we're trying to do is, it was a story by a guy called John McQuillan, who was the engineer for Manor Racing Formula One team. And when John came to do some work with us, he was very skeptical because he said, all I'm interested in is what makes the car go faster. And I'd love to know what you can do can actually make a difference to the car going any quicker. You know, this is technical stuff. This is about processes. It's about design. It's not about leadership and the way we treat our people. Our belief is that that you can increase performance dramatically, very much by the way you interact with your teams. So when you've said today this is about increasing sales performance, our belief is it can be about increasing any performance. We've worked a lot with sales teams in Sony, and you know, so a lot of these things are kind of tried and tested by them. But it is all about behaviours for us.
Yeah. So as we move towards the final quarter, and now in the final quarter of 2020, executives, I think, across the IT channel industry will no doubt be under increased pressure to perform. And for many, that will be to make up for lost ground from a revenue perspective. Now, for many sales leaders out there, this means bringing out the whip, and some maybe even dangling perhaps a bigger carrot in terms of commission, of course, although not necessarily affordable for everyone. So my question to you, Dean, is, you know, as a leadership coach, are these methods really the most practical and most efficient?
Okay, that's a great question, Richard. I mean, I guess for me to say my focus is somewhere else. That's not to say that those things don't work, and I would hate for anybody to think that we're dismissive of all of those things, because they definitely have an effect. But I also think there are other ways in which to gain some of those benefits. And if you wouldn't mind, if I could kind of start off with a bit of a story, and it'll give a little bit more insight into me as well, because one of the things I have to do today is come to somebody else's office, because I live in a very rural part of Wales. My nearest neighbour is about half a mile away. And my broadband this morning was very poor because of the bad weather here. And I think this story illustrates what often happens when we're thinking about solving problems. So my nearest neighbour is a chap called Bob Morgan. He's a small farmer. I don't mean he's small, his farm is small. And he's a great neighbour. So, you know, always very helpful. And as a result of that, what happens every kind of May, June, myself and my two lads will go down and we'll shear his sheep for him. So this probably sounds like a strange story when you sat there. And we were down there a couple of years back, and my boys were catching the sheep ready to be shorn. And Bob was looking at my eldest boy, and I could see the kind of wry look on his face. And he said, "Do you know?" He said, "He reminds me of someone I grew up with." He said, "There was a man in our village called David Davis." He said, "And your son Evan reminds me of David." So I thought, "Oh, that's nice." So I said, "Why is that?" And he said, "Well, I could never decide whether he was the cleverest man I'd ever met or the village idiot." He said he was just such a dichotomy. So I said, "What do you mean, Bob?" He said, "Well, let me give you an example." He said, "I must have been about 11 or 12. He said, and David lived in a long, low cottage, a Welsh longhouse with a barn attached to the end of it, a bit of a paddock behind, and a gravel yard in front. And he said, myself and my friend were walking past the yard, and we could see David, or Di as we called him, on his hands and knees in the gravel. So, you know, we called across, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I'm looking for my key, boys, the key for the workshop. I've lost the key." "Oh, would you like us to help you, Di?" "Oh, that'd be great, boys." So off we went, got on our hands and knees, and we're looking around in the gravel. And as we're doing that, you know, a few other people are going past. What's going on over there? And it ends up, there's about 6 of us all looking for Di's keys in this gravel. Quite uncomfortable, you know, on your hands and knees in the gravel. And then somebody said to him, "So, Di, where exactly did you drop them? Can you remember?" And he said, yeah, I dropped them in the barn." And we kind of stopped and looked at him. And he said, "The barn? Yeah, well, why are we looking out here?" And if you don't mind, what I'll do is I'll come back and tell you what he said at the end of the webinar, because it's quite intriguing.
Okay, you've got me intrigued. So today, I think, so we've also had a couple of conversations leading up to this webinar, and what I really want people to walk away with today is techniques to improve performance, right? And the 3 areas, or 3 techniques, if you like, that we've discussed at quite length are strength-based feedback, appreciative inquiry, and the power of stories for purpose. Now, let's take each one of these at a time. So if we start with strength-based feedback, can you give us some insight into exactly what you mean by this? Because again, you know, a lot of managers I think have heard of or appreciate to some degree, you know, the power of positivity, let's say, but I don't think that there are lots of people out there who dismiss it as almost a Pollyanna attitude, right? You know, everything, it's to be glad for everything. Does that really influence performance?
Okay. Well, I guess we're really lucky now, because one of the things that we've got working for us that has only been really prevalent in the last 10 years, and certainly more so in the last 5, is the whole area of neuroscience. So whereas previously people would make guesses as to whether these things work, now we can actually look with fMRI, we can see what's going on in people's brains, where the electricity is flowing, where things are lighting up. So it's much clearer enough to say these are not a finger in the air thing, they are reality. And this causes a huge challenge for a lot of leaders. So as you say, people have always understood that feedback is important. But a lot of the research now is pointing to the fact that, yeah, feedback is important, but certain sorts of feedback are very significant in the effect they have on performance. So, you know, if you think about, for a long time, people have felt that there needed to be a balance. There even used to be that awful sandwich that people would give out, you know, where you'd give some praise and then you find the negative and then you'd give some praise. Yeah. And I'm going to offer a better sandwich today. I think there's a much tastier sandwich on offer here. But what they found was that when people get negative feedback, or a redirect, if as you'd like to call it, about poor performance, what happens is they see it as an attack, and then their performance actually drops. So telling somebody what they've done wrong and recounting that to them, the only thing it might do is stop them doing that again. And I understand that you have to do that. You know, if a nurse is delivering the wrong drugs, that has to stop. And it will do that. What it won't do is improve performance. What they found, the only thing that makes a difference to people's performance going up is positive feedback. So for a lot of managers, that's a huge challenge. Yeah? It's a kind of belief change. And they've done some great sort of experiments around this. There's a lovely story from the Dallas Cowboys. So there's a guy called Tom Landry who took over the Dallas Cowboys in the late 70s when they weren't doing particularly well. And he's credited with being one of the first people to do video analysis of the game. I know all the sports do it now, but Landry was one of the first. But what he did that was interesting was when he showed them the video analysis of their performance, he only ever showed them good performance. So you would get the team around after a match, and they would be some pretty poor matches. They weren't performing well. And he'd show a video of a particular kick, and he'd say, look at that perfectly timed kick. Look, it lands exactly where you want it to. That was beautifully executed. Here's a tackle or a block that these guys did at this particular point. And what he found was that by focusing on the positive aspects of their performance increased. Now, you know, again, for a lot of people, that's a huge mindset shift. Interestingly, Sean Edwards, the Welsh defence coach up until a few years ago, who sadly has now gone to France, has actually said the same thing. He came out in the press and said he's beginning to realise that only positive feedback makes a difference.
Yeah. So does that mean that
that's very challenging? Sorry, Richard.
So if we're just focusing on positive feedback, so complimenting what people have done good in their performance for the last week, quarter, month, whatever we're analysing, are we now to ignore the negative?
You can't, can you? If something is damaging, then you have to find a way to stop that. But certainly not mixing the two is important, because people take away a confused message. You know, if you give somebody a positive and a negative in the same sit down, then the kind of person who believes they're a great performer anyway will probably ignore the negative and take away, oh yeah, okay, he's told me that, but he actually finished telling me I'm pretty good. The person who's very self-critical will only focus on the negative, and they'll miss the positive. So it is very confusing. So the method I'm going to share with you can be used for a redirect or some critical feedback as well. And that is necessary, but don't think it's going to boost performance. I had a great discussion with a production director in Sony, actually, who said to me, well, actually, I don't agree with that. He said, I prefer negative feedback. I like people to tell me where I'm going wrong, and then I can improve my performance as a result. And the response was, yeah, okay, I believe that. I believe that is what you prefer. But all the research says that even for you, that won't boost your performance. The studies they did were great. So they even separated people out. Those people who prefer, I'd rather critical feedback because I can build my performance. They put them in a control group, and they did things like physical tests, throw a ball through a basketball hoop, do some mental arithmetic, sort out some mental puzzles, you know, and they looked at their performance. And then what they did was they gave them the critical feedback that they said worked for them. And then they watched their performance drop. And whenever they repeated the experiment, the performance of that group dropped, even though they were enjoying the critical feedback, so they said, and thought it would boost their performance. It doesn't. When you give them the positive feedback, their performance went up. So it is a mindset change, but it's real. And again, looking at the MFRI, where you could see which parts of the people's brains closed down. So when they were given negative feedback, the amygdala lights up, the emotional center of the brain. I'm under attack, and then that closes down the other parts of the brain, and we're not open to communication.
It's interesting, like you say, from a sales leadership perspective, that it is it's not even a belief. I don't believe it's a belief set change or belief change or a mindset change. So I believe everybody does inherently believe in this, but it's the technique about how to execute it on the ground. Does that make sense? So
sure.
how do you, for people on the session today, how can they take this advice? I don't want people to leave the session today thinking, yeah, but I know that already. Or what can they do when they're sitting with their teams this afternoon? How would you recommend they approach this?
The key thing is do something. Yeah, I mean, again, another piece of research, and it came from the CIPD, was that the worst thing you can do is ignore somebody. So if you don't give people any feedback or any attention, their performance really plummets. If you give people very poor critical feedback, so you deliver it badly and it's difficult for them to accept, that still has a better effect on performance than being ignored. So we'd rather somebody be unpleasant to us than not bother with us at all. But if you can do the positive thing, that really works. And the model we've used a lot with organizations is the beef model. So I apologize to vegetarians out there, but this is the beef sandwich rather than the variety of sandwich we were discussing earlier. And the idea behind the beef model is that the sandwich bit is a question that we would recommend you start any feedback with. So if you're going to give somebody some feedback, the first thing we would do is to ask them how they feel their performance is. So rather than going to tell mode, and often people will tell you a lot about their performance that you may not have picked up yourself. And it also gives you a good view then of the gap. So what's the gap between us in terms of our expectation and understanding? And then comes the beef. So then there's the filling. So, and people will be familiar with these kind of things. So the B is the behavior. So this is what I want to talk to you about. So Richard, what I'd like to talk to you about today is the quality of the report that you wrote for me. So they're really clear about what this conversation is. And then the first E in the brief is the evidence bit. So this, the evidence, the examples, this is what we've seen done around this behavior. So in this case, so the report you wrote for me, Richard, it was very succinct, like I asked it to be. Yeah, so you kept it to 3 pages. It was very easy to understand. You put a summary in the back, which was even better for me. So I had a kind of quick ready reckoner. I'd asked you to deliver it to me by the Thursday afternoon, and you delivered it to me on the Wednesday morning. So there's there's the examples, the concrete bit. This is what you did. The next E, and this is the bit that everyone misses, yeah. And this is the bit the psychologists say has the greatest significance in somebody wanting to do more of that behavior, and that E is the effect. So this is the effect of that. So in this instance, Richard, so the effect of that report meant that when I went into the sales meeting, I was very confident about my information. It was there. I knew that I could very quickly look at anything that I needed to look at because of the ready reckoning you provided. It meant that I had a very good conversation with the people in the room, and I'm pretty sure we're going to get a better result. So the whole business will benefit from the fact that you put that together. So now you can see that's the effect it had on me, my confidence in all of those things when I went into the meeting. And then finally, the F is, so going forward or in the future, what I'd like you to do is maintain that standard of briefing, of report writing. But if you could find one of your colleagues and maybe help them to be able to produce something of a similar quality, that would be great for the organization. So you can see that it's kind of really concise. It's an easy model to follow. And you can sit down as a leader and map out the bit of feedback that you're going to give. The good thing is it also works very well for the redirect or the negative. So if we were to, now again, I'm not expecting this to boost performance. What I'm hoping this will do is stop you doing something that I wish you weren't currently doing. So let's say we're going to talk to you about, the B this time is about your lateness. So this is about your punctuality, Richard. Okay,
Mhm.
so the evidence is over the last 3 weeks, you've been late for 4 meetings. The first Monday, you were late 7 minutes. The following Wednesday, you were late for 8 minutes. And this week, you were nearly half an hour late for the sales meeting that we were meant to be kicking off. Okay, so that's the evidence. Again, the examples, you can't argue with it. Then comes the effect of it. So the effect of that was your colleagues were waiting for you. You wasted, I don't know how much of company time and money. We were very unsure then as to your professionality. So do you really want this role? Is this a job for you going forward? Because it's left me now with a real sense of concern that perhaps you don't take the role seriously. So going forward, what's going to happen for future meetings, what I'd like you to do is make sure that you are at every meeting on time. And by that, I mean in the room 5 minutes before the meeting is due to start. If for some reason you can't be there, then you need to text either myself or one of your colleagues to let me know that that's happening.
Yeah.
So you can see it. There's real clarity there. It's not pleasant and it's not going to boost performance, but that person is now absolutely clear of what expected of them. And the effect bit, again, is the one that tends to get people to change their behavior. Yeah. So we much prefer the beef model to the sandwich that others have been talking about over the past.
100%. I think you're absolutely right with the clarity there is critical, right? Because if someone leaves a meeting confused in any way about the message, or not even the message, sometimes it can be if the manager hosting the meeting is in any way unclear, I think that can have an impact on someone's perception of how strong a manager that is. If they're perceived as being weak or sort of insecure in delivering an uncomfortable message. Yeah. Having this posture from a sales leadership perspective, I think, is key, and I can definitely see how this would result in a much more positive outcome.
Yeah, particularly when you're talking about the positive feedback, and we've got some resources around this, and I'll happily leave with you as well if that's helpful.
Yeah. So talk to me. There's another thing you mentioned, radical candor.
Yeah. So that was a model that came from a lady called Kim Scott, who worked for Apple and Google and a lot of the big tech companies in the States. And she was always kind of shocked by the lack of quality feedback in an organization. And she used a lovely story where she said she was in a corridor with a couple of senior colleagues. And one of the senior managers came down the corridor, and she was wearing a business suit, a trouser suit. And she said, unfortunately, what had happened, this woman had been in the restroom, had come out, and her blouse was actually poking out through the fly of her trousers. And so it looked ridiculous. And she said she could see it as she walked past. Sorry, she couldn't see it, that her colleagues were looking this way, but she could see the grin on their faces as this senior manager walked past. So as she went past, Kim Scott said to these guys, well, what were you grinning at then when Linda walked past? And they went, oh yeah, she's got a piece of clothing sticking out the front of her trousers. It looks ridiculous. Kim said, well, why didn't you tell her? I said, oh, come on, the one guy said, well, it's a bit embarrassing to say something. And the other guy said, well, it's quite funny, isn't it? And she said, well, it's not going to be funny for her when she walks into the next sales meeting and somebody does point at her, or she sees it herself. She's not going to find that very funny, and she's not going to think you're very funny for not giving her that feedback. And what can also, that happens all the time. People won't deliver that kind of feedback because they're worried about upsetting the person, they're nervous themselves. And basically what you're doing is you're leaving somebody with a piece of broccoli between their teeth. They don't know it's there. Everyone else can see it, but they can't move it until somebody tells them about it. So if something is damaging someone, or is critical to their performance, they do need to know. But her model says you can only do that effectively if, first of all, you've shown that it comes from a point of view of care. So the only reason I'm telling you this is because I care about you. I don't want you to continue having this issue moving forward. And then you can be quite direct with your feedback. And she said, quite obviously in that example, those guys didn't care.
Yeah. All right. I think that's key. And I think you're absolutely right. But creating that environment in a workplace whereby, like you say, people do genuinely care for each other and can provide that feedback, it will give a degree of comfort for people wanting to work there as well. And I think that in itself, because people want to be secure, right? They want certainty, and if you can provide a workplace that offers that will make an employee more loyal than money or anything else.
Yeah, and particularly at this point in time now, where people feel insecure for all kinds of reasons with the pandemic and the likes, that leaders' job to make people feel safe, because again, the neuroscience shows when people feel safe, they do good work. And if you think
Yeah.
about it, even that delivery of feedback, that can make people feel very unsafe. The idea that you show your people you care about them. I mean, I'll give you an example. One of the things we ask people on our leadership programs, and it feels like quite a difficult question, we'll say to leaders, so for you, what's most important, being liked or respected? And the people watching at the minute might want to just pause for a moment and have a think, okay, what would my answer be to that? What's most important, liked or respected? And almost overwhelmingly, the answer that comes back is respected.
Yeah.
And often Mike and myself will say, well, for us, it's liked. We think like is more important. And there's a kind of shocked silence in the room. And there's another lady called Amy Cuddy who did a piece of research on this, and she found out that in reality, what everybody's looking for is the sweet spot, where you have both, so people are both liked and respected. But her research said, okay, so if that's what you want, where do you have to start? And what she found was that if you initialize it by being liked, and then people see the steal in you, they see it as an extra benefit. Now it's a plus in your character. Yeah. Whereas if they only ever see the steal and they never get to like you, then that actually becomes difficult. We had a great example. I was working many years ago, working with people who were coming out of prison to build confidence. Yeah, so these were all people who'd been involved in heroin, and we were there to build up a CV for them, try and help them get a job and those kind of things. We were taking them into the outdoors, and the prison warden working with them came to speak to us, and he said, everyone that's spoken to you has probably said, when you first meet these guys, go in tough, you can always loosen up. And yeah, so whatever you do, don't do that. So if you try and show them how tough you are, they'll very quickly show you how tough you're not. But if you can get them to like you, they'll do anything for you. And I thought it was a really good lesson. And we ask leaders now a different question. So we say, when you're thinking about your own leadership, would you like people to follow you for your dominance? So the fact that you are senior, that you can hire and fire them, that you have power over their future, their wage, or would you like them to follow you because of your prestige? And that's a very different question. And what builds prestige?
You know what? Have you done any work with the DISC model for personality profiling before? Yeah. We did this in a company I used to work for a few years ago, and what I found really interesting. So I'm very high D, very high I, and I think it's good that I have both, because if I was just a high D, people would hate me. So that balances it out, makes me more personable, let's say. But if I was just a high I and I didn't have the D to counter that, I would be the class clown. So there has to be a balance. And it's interesting you say about liked or respected, because my thinking has always been I'd rather be respected, because my own interpretation of it was if people just liked me, they wouldn't necessarily do as I asked.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But I can 100% see what you mean. Both is obviously important, but leading with the kind of more personable, being liked on the road to respect. I can see how that would have perhaps more of an impact.
Yeah, we saw a quote that was, it said the quote was from Bear Grylls, but it wasn't. It was from one of the American presidents, and it said, it was lovely. It said, nobody cares what you know until they know that you care. Well, that's really well worth thinking about, And again, they found with dominance leaders, their teams want to spend time with them alone. They found it difficult to have eye contact with them. Whereas with prestige leaders, they would seek them out. They wanted to spend time with them because they knew there were things they could learn from this person. There were traits that they'd like to have themselves. They would happily have eye contact with them. And you think, okay, so if you want your people to have that belief about you, what do you have to do? You've got to find ways to show them that you care. Yeah,
100%. Okay, just before we move on to the second part, which is appreciative inquiry, for those listening, if you have any questions or insights, please write them in the chat box now. We'll quite happily read them out. Be interested to hear what people are thinking about what Dean was just saying about being respected or liked. Just interested to know what your opinions are on that, or whether you're a leader that prefers to be liked or respected. So let's please put something in the chat box and let us know. So let's now move on to the second technique here, Dean, and this is the appreciative inquiry. Can you just give us a bit of background into what exactly this means?
Yeah, so this is the idea that when you're trying to ask people questions, when you're trying to get information out of them, you phrase and frame your questions in a positive way. Again, because it has that effect of opening people's brains up, not closing down their communication, not closing down their thinking. And it's not an easy thing to do. You know, we're hardwired for the negative. As a safety precaution, our brains are always looking for danger around us. And you know, if you think about any normal situation, say you pay for somebody to decorate the living room behind you, Richie, you know, and the painter comes and says to you, right, Richie, I finished. You go in the room, what do you look for? What's the first thing you look for?
Mistakes, where they missed it.
Yeah, so is there a blob on the carpet? Is there a run on the radiator? Those kind of things. And we can't help it because those are the kind of things that keep us safe. So, and we do enough of that. We're great at spotting the negative. What we don't do is spot enough of the positive. So even thinking about our questions and the effect they have. So for example, engineers typically, they love the question why. So depending on what course they've been on, you know, if you ask the question why 5 times or 7 times, you get to the root cause of the problem. And why is a great question for processes and machinery, but it's a terrible question for people. So we as business coaches try never to ask anybody the question why. That's it. You know, if I say to you, so why are you wearing a black shirt today?
Yeah.
Straight away, there's that feeling that, hang on, that's kind of accusatory.
Yeah.
Again, what they found is that when you ask a why question, the only part of the brain that lights up is the limbic system, the fight, flight, or freeze part. If you ask somebody a how question, so how did you choose your shirt this morning, Richard? What happens then is the logic part of the brain lights up. Yeah, so you're accepting that. And the best of all is if you ask somebody a what question, so what got you to choose a black shirt this morning? Access all, so the whole brain lights up. So if we can, first of all, think about phrasing our questions and taking away the why, and then putting them into a solution focus rather than a problem focus. So if I give you an example, imagine your sales team there and you say to them, so why didn't you hit your targets? Whereas a much better question would be, so what do you need to do next time to hit your targets? Yeah. They know they've missed their targets, but you're focusing on the positive aspect of what they can do about it. You know, why did this happen? Not a great question. What did you want to achieve here? Much better question. So there are a whole range of ways in which you can focus things differently and get a different response. Now, they're not easy to do. So it demands a lot of the leader. And we found on courses where we've said to people, okay, what are you going to do now? Pair up, and you've just got 5 minutes to find out as much as you can about the other person, but you're only allowed to ask open, strength-based questions. And you just get silent because it's not something that we're used to doing. No, you've asked, like, okay, so in this project, which of your strengths were you able to bring to the project most? Oh, okay. What aspects of the project were most successful? Yeah, I can definitely see, like you said, it can also be can sometimes be uncomfortable when you're just starting the different line of questioning, but I can definitely see now how this would be certainly less confrontational than a why. Yeah, 100%. It's quite interesting. I'm learning a lot today because I've used why an incredible amount in my career. We do. I was on point as well, you know. We can't help ourselves, and if you think about it, the leader often sets the temperature in any meeting or any room. So you're often asking your people to be solution focused, and yet your very actions mean that their minds are closing down. I mean, I'll share a story with you that was, we were very fortunate actually. We were working with a big multinational blue chip, and it was a very senior chap there, the MD, we'd known for years, and he was ex-Special Forces. So he'd served in Kosovo, he'd served in Northern Ireland. He was a lovely bloke, but you knew, you know, you kind of didn't want to get on the wrong side of him. Not that we ever saw that side, but it was obviously there. And they were in a board meeting, and they'd asked us to go into the board meeting to watch the board behaviour to see if there's anything that they needed to do differently. And it was a very interesting session because the finance director had some bad news to deliver. And she was a lady that kind of was very good, you know, she was always right on her game. She was very worried. You could sense the feel in the room that other people knew that she was going to be delivering this bad news. And there was almost a, well, at least it's not me, you know, somebody else's neck is on the line here. Sat around the table, and as the meeting started, the first thing she did was got up and said, look, I need to get this out on the table straight away. This is serious. I basically missed a column in something. This is going to have a knock-on effect. And the MD kind of looked at her, and the first thing he did was he kind of took his glasses off, folded them, put them down on the table, and you could hear the pin drop. And Mike and I went, what's going to happen here? And then he slowly got up from his chair, and he stood up and he went, yes, Hibbs is human. And everyone kind of looked. He went, I never thought I'd see her make a mistake. He said, she never gets anything wrong. That's brilliant. He said, that just makes me feel so much better. And then he said, right, okay, so how are we going to make sure that she never gets in this situation again, you know, that these mistakes don't happen? And we just thought that was a brilliant bit of leadership, because that's exactly what he wanted in that room, was that solution focus. Let's have this, got everybody back on track. And that was all down to his emotional intelligence. Yeah. And, you know, those things, can you focus things positively? Yeah, you can. But it does take effort, because it's not our normal way of doing things. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting that the kind of conflict or mixed messaging is quite often present in these situations whereby, you know, there's openly this attitude of we are a solution-oriented enterprise in everything we do, let's say. But then if the questions we ask or the way we ask questions is not in line with that that mindset, there's going to be conflict, and there's going to be a confusion, I think, and disbelief to some extent. You know, how can you buy into this solution-oriented mindset when you're being managed in a way that is contrary to that?
Absolutely, and you know, we often talk about working with a human in mind. So we do so many things in business sense that just it works against the way the human mind works, and then we wonder why it causes problems. You know, I think we were chatting the other day. Performance management is a great example of that. So we invest all this effort into performance management. You know, imagine if you did that with your family. So your children are playing at grandma's or something, and you think, well, that's a bit naughty. They shouldn't be doing that. I'll make a note of that. You wait for 3 months' time when we sit down. You wouldn't. You would just talk to them straight away. And yet we do things from a business sense and think, well, why is that so difficult? Why don't these rewards work? Why doesn't performance work in the way that you know that we think it should? So but it is a challenge for them.
You're right. I think it's quite interesting. But so the kind of key takeaway, if you like, as far as appreciative inquiry is concerned, is move away from a why question, and more towards certainly how, but what you would advocate is the best kind of question to ask, right?
Yeah, and the strength of these questions, you know. So what is it that has allowed you to do your best work in this team? Yeah, what is it about this that you value most? Those things will bring people together, and again, it's seen that it boosts performance in the group. Whereas if what you're doing is in fact just criticizing, then it's no surprise that that has a negative effect, really.
Yeah. So I have a question for you regarding so 100% bought into the idea of strength-based feedback and appreciative inquiry. And clearly the theme here is focusing on the positive. Now, the reality is we all have people on our teams, or have all had people on our teams at some point that are just no good for whatever reason. The reality in organisation, and it's clearly never our fault as leaders. Okay, we have to put up.
We didn't choose them.
It's always their fault. But the reality is that there will inevitably come a time when some people have to move on. Okay, and some of because of the way organisations have been set up, certainly from a HR perspective, the reality is you can't let someone go unless you've had these perhaps tougher, more negative conversations, or at least these conversations documented. I mean, what would you say to that? Would you counter that, or how would you approach that? Obviously, the goal is obviously never to set someone up for exit, but the reality is you don't want to, and I've been guilty of this myself in the past, when I've had such you know, people on my team that I've basically kept on the team for too long, because I got to the point where, okay, these guys need to leave now, but I couldn't, they couldn't exit the business because I hadn't documented the negative side of their performance adequately enough.
Yeah, sure. I quite like, or I've seen the Netflix approach. I don't know whether you're aware of what Netflix do, which is, it's quite brutal, but their managers, when they have a one-to-one with one of their staff, they have to ask themselves 2 questions. So they have to say, if this person told me they were going to leave, what would I do to keep them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So would I give them more responsibility? Would I give them more reward? And the second question is, if the answer to that is nothing, then why are they still here?
Mm.
Yeah, so I wouldn't give them any more than they've got now. And if the answer is I would give them this amount of money, I would give them this project, then why haven't you done it?
Yeah.
So the emphasis going straight back to, for you as the leader, it is about you. But it is, if you think about that lead feedback model, one of the things to do is to make sure that people are absolutely clear about that poor performance. Because again, we skirt it, and we also do a terrible thing called buyback. I don't know whether you've been guilty of this. I know I have. When I was a leader of an organization, I know I did it myself. So you'd give somebody that very difficult feedback, and then at the end you'd say, but I know you've been really busy and under a lot of stress at the minute. Bang. So now you just said, but actually it's okay.
Yeah.
Now we do that because we want to be humane, we want to be decent, but actually that's not helpful. So just doing little things like that, so you make sure that you don't put that buyback in there, so they're really clear, this is about your performance, this is what you need to do. And some of the organizations we work for, I've seen them do that really, really well. One of the so many businesses that we work for, I think they did it beautifully. They got their poor performers around and said, look, this is where performance needs to be, this is where it is at the minute. You have a choice now. So you can leave at this point with, with a package of some sort, or a year of support to get your performance to where we need it to be. There'll be a review then, and if your performance isn't where we want it to be, then you'll go without the package. So it's your choice. And I thought that was really fair. And what they found was that most people who wanted to stay improved their performance. And often the reason they weren't performing is because they didn't know. Nobody told them. Or certainly not clear enough.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether that's is helpful or answered your question. Probably it is the most difficult thing, isn't it? It's a horrible part of a leader's job.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. It's an uncomfortable conversation to have, but I think unless the conversation is had continuously, the delay in such conversations makes the conversation even harder, right? So if we leave these conversations for quarterly or half-yearly reviews, the effect is going to be limited. But if it's part of a continuous conversation, then and I think this is, we had a session a few weeks ago about Gareth, who was on the session, and we were discussing management under the COVID-19 magnifying glass. And in that session, we were discussing, given the change in the way people now have to work, i.e. not being in the office, people working from home, not being in close proximity to their teams, it's very evident that if you don't have the right kind of cadence with your teams, you don't have the right structure when it comes to conversations, this can have a massive impact. So I think all these things are important from a leadership perspective, to have this framework of success. And again, it's not structure. When I say structure, I don't rigidity, I mean just a framework within which we operate, irrespective of where we are, whether we're at home or we're in the office. There should be a way we conduct ourselves with our teams that enables them to succeed, right?
Well, that regularity is so important, isn't it? You think how often you're giving feedback to your family and friends, the close people around you. It's constant. And there's a software company I know who they talk about your sphere of influence. So they say, as a leader, you should be able to commit to at least one-to-one with every member of your team on a weekly basis. You can't, then your team is too big. So if you are only capable of, if you say, you know what, I can only fit in 8, well, then you'll never have a team bigger than 8. If you're somebody
Yeah.
that says, you know what, I can fit in 20, then okay, you can have a team of 20. They say it's that important that that's how we should gauge it. And I
Yeah.
think that, because it is the day job. The trouble is, lots of leaders think it's the add-on to the day job.
Yeah.
You're
100%.
putting fuel into the tank, so those people who are going to go out and get you the results. How important motivation for those people, and how much attention do we pay to it? I think I shared with you, I was talking to a senior manager in Tata Steel, and I'd asked his senior team, so how often on a daily basis do you look to motivate your teams? And there was a bit of quiet in the room, and somebody went, well, yeah, you walk past and you'll say, yeah, well done. And the MD said, hang on a minute, that's not what he asked. How often do we do targeted motivation? He said, we don't do it at all. So we all believe it's the most important thing, and yet we just don't do it. That's nuts.
Yeah, exactly. No, entirely. Look, we've got a little bit of time left, and I wanted to make sure we get into the third part, which is the power of stories. Clearly, you're an advocate of stories. I think you've given 20.
That's all I've got.
Have you got any left? So look, let's because again, I think it's certainly as commercial leaders, the majority of us will have worked in sales to some extent as well. If we're not still selling to clients, we're certainly selling to our teams, our peers, and the people that we report to. And we have an understanding of how we would use it in sales conversation, but how do we use these in management conversations? So can you just give us some insight into why you've put this down as one of the strategies to improve performance?
Yeah, I think stories are the way humans have evolved to communicate to each other. Yeah, so we're fantastic at telling tales. We understand things quickly through tales and analogies. I remember watching a documentary about social anthropology, and they were saying that there are tribes on this planet that have never invented the wheel, but they've never come across a tribe that doesn't use story. So again, it's hardwired into us. And again, you think in our organizations, we sometimes wonder why the jungle drums work more effectively than any communication strategy we have. So, the power of story really works. I was thinking of a story then when you were talking about putting the feedback into some kind of process, where an organization did that. So they set a KPI for feedback for managers. Yeah. So every manager had to get 15 pieces of feedback in a week, and it was hysterical. So what you had was these guys they forgot. And then come Thursday evening, Friday morning, they think, oh no, I haven't done my feedback KPI. So they'd be running around the production floor going, well done, Richard, that was a really good piece of work. It was just bonkers. So the people on the receiving end of it are like, oh, you couldn't have got it more wrong.
Yeah.
But again, for me, that story works in explaining why the process is not the important bit. Yeah. So in terms of sales teams having a clear purpose about why what they're doing is important. If you can tell a story rather than put a number on the wall, often that will make them driven to get better results. We chatted about Tom's shoes in the States. So Tom was at a couple of shoe shops, successful shoe shops, paid his staff well, incentivized them with a reward scheme, then went off on holidays himself to some third world country, I can't remember which one, and was really appalled at the state of the children's footwear there. And so when he came back, he decided to change his business model, and he decided what he would do is he would donate a new pair of shoes for a child in the third world for every pair of shoes that were bought in the US, from his stores. And able to do that, he cut his sales team's bonus. He stopped giving them a bonus. That money is now going to be spent on putting footwear on these kids. And unbelievably, his sales went up. So those sales teams would work harder to put shoes on third world children than they would to line their own pockets. Now that worked because he already paid them well enough.
Yeah.
So the idea being that the best use of money is to take the worry about money off the table. That worked. We were in another organization that made medical kit. Stuff was being used in cardiac ops. And they were getting malfunctions on this kit due to a soldering error somewhere in the process. And you can imagine what most production environments would do. They would do a lean process. They would do all these things to try and iron out this problem. What the MD did there was he brought some people in whose lives had been saved by that operation, and he walked them around the production area talking to the operators who were making this kit. You know, oh, that's really difficult. That's very small work you've got to do there, very detailed. Yeah, you know, glad you got it right though, because you know what? If that kit hadn't have worked, I wouldn't have seen my grandchildren. And then what happened? The defect rate plummeted.
Yeah.
So you didn't have to incentivize them in any way. They just created that story as to this is why this works. Because
the story is the way the purpose begins in people, right?
Yeah. Money is, you know, money and rewards, yeah, they do work. And, you know, again, I wouldn't wish to be seen to be dismissing targets. And I know those things are important, but for most of us, that's not how our brain works. We don't chase a number. We'll chase a feeling.
I think certainly a lot of the candidates that I speak to on a daily basis, you know, I whenever I'm interviewing candidates about, you know, their requirement or the need to move to another organization, one of the questions I ask them is, you know, what are your drivers for change? Obviously, money could be one of those drivers. Personal development could be another, opportunity another. You know, there are many, many different things. But the reality is, I would say, probably in all, no, actually, I do recall one gentleman saying money is the number one thing, and he articulated why that was. But the majority of people, money is certainly not the first. And for many, it's probably 3 or 4. Because they're ultimately looking for, and I think what's really interesting is over the last 6 months, as people have been pushed into this, you know, working from home environment, I think a lot of people have had time to reflect on, am I in the right company? What am I doing? What's happening with my career? You know, and they've had really a long time to reflect on their purpose, if you like, and consequently, you know, we're seeing a lot of people are now open to moving jobs. Doesn't necessarily mean they're all, you know, the perception for some companies is there's lots of cheap labor on the market because lots of people out of jobs. The reality is there are more people who are still in jobs who are now looking. There's a lot more passive talent in the market because they're searching for their next opportunity that's not driven by money. It's driven more by purpose. Hey, I want to be part of a company's success story. Or I want perhaps better recognition or whatever. Money is definitely not there. So I think you're entirely correct.
Then, Richard, when you said about their success stories, as leaders, if we can find the success stories and talk about those in the business, and not from a number point of view, but actually what was going on, the impact of those things, that has a great effect on the people who are working there. But it's also very attractive to anyone who might be thinking about coming to you. What is your story as a business? I remember talking to the MD in Sony in Wales. He's an incredible bloke. He's a very, very clever guy. He's had all kinds of accolades. He's had his OBE. I think he's even got a cap for playing football for Wales over 50s. But I asked him what drives him. What's his continual urge to do better there? And he said, well, do you know what? He said, this place allows people here to have a holiday, pay their mortgage, have a good car. Look, he said, I want it to be here for the next 20, 30 years so as the people in this area can do it. And I thought, I absolutely believed him. That's what his driver is. Now you hear that and you think, would I like to go and work there? Yeah, I would.
100%. It's quite interesting. You know, some of one of the companies that I'm working with at the moment. Obviously, I'm talking to candidates about the role, and as I'm talking, so part of my role is to do consulting with a company to start with, to really fully understand, you know, what the company has to offer. Because my role is ultimately having to sell that or position that company as a good opportunity for candidates. And one of the roles I'm working on at the moment, one of the things I'm saying to candidates, which is absolutely true, is that if I were in the job market now, I'd be applying for this job because it's that, you know, I've really sold myself on the opportunity that this client has, and I think that resonates more with people than finances, 100%. So just to kind of sum up, because we're almost at a time, Dean. So the 3 strategies or techniques, if you like, for improving performance, just to kind of sum up. So strength-based feedback, as you mentioned, the kind of principle within that would be the beef sandwich. So what would it, just run back that again. So the beef was the behavior, evidence, effect, forward, right?
Future or forward,
Perfect.
And the key to it is just doing it. You know, don't worry if you do it badly. It doesn't matter. Doing it badly is better than not doing it at all.
Yeah, 100%. So the second technique was that regarding appreciative inquiry. So again, this comes back to around the way we ask questions of our team in much the same way, I guess, the same way, like I said, the way we approach businesses that we're looking to sell our product or service into, right? We move away from the why or the more confrontational questions that for example, you wouldn't ask a client or potential client why they're using a competitor. You'd ask them, what can we do to beat them, or how can we improve upon the service you're already getting? So it's applying those same principles in our management conversations. So moving away from the why, moving more towards how, but what being the better.
Question, yeah.
And then the final thing is the power of stories. So, and again, you're looking at this as a way of communicating purpose. So, why are we doing this together? And I guess that comes back to the importance of when you're building any division is what is the common goal? What is the vision? And I think this is something that perhaps gets missed a lot of the time. We as an employee will look at this as a point of interest when we start with a company.
Yeah.
But then how regularly are we reminded of that purpose or that vision? And I don't just mean having it on the wall. I mean how, and I guess not just from a company perspective, how does my daily activity contribute to the overall vision or ambition of this organization? So understanding, I think, how we fit into that is a key thing. And as leaders, having a conversation that allows people to realize that on an ongoing basis, on a continuous basis, I think is key. Is there anything else you wanted to add in, just in closing, Dean?
No, I think the key thing is go and give it a go. So each of those things, go give some feedback. Try and frame your questions positively and avoid the why, and look for some positive stories in your organization and share them. But I loved your point there about being able to see where you fit. The MD of Pepsi said a lovely thing. He said it's every leader's job to create a vision that every employee can paint themselves into. And I think that's a really nice way of looking at it. And I guess they're all coaching skills. They're all the skills that coaches would use. And I think if leaders want to get more performance from their teams, then get their leaders, get their managers to pick up a few coaching skills, and that makes a huge difference. And I guess the story, Bob's story. Yeah. So if we remember back to everyone's on the floor looking for Di Davis's keys, and they asked, so can you remember exactly where you dropped them? And he says, yeah, I dropped them in the barn. And everyone turns to him and said, so why are we looking out here? And his answer was, because it's dark in there. I just think it was such a lovely story, because we do it all the time. We look where it's easy rather than where the real answer will come from. And often as leaders, we look at our teams, we look at shoving a KPI up, and actually we just need to sort of tweak our behaviors a little bit, and we could make a big difference. But that's the challenge for us.
Like I say, quite often we know where the answers lie, but we're perhaps not confident enough, maybe sometimes, to look in the right areas. Like you say, look, Dean, thanks very much for that story, and obviously for your time today. I've thoroughly enjoyed today's session, as I see our listeners have as well. So look, if you'd like to, as I mentioned earlier, guys, if you'd like to obtain a copy of the white paper that we've now completed, please put white paper in the chat box, and I shall arrange for a copy of that to be sent to you in the coming weeks. Also, if you'd like to arrange an informal chat about becoming part of our mastermind community, again, just type the word mastermind in the chat box, and either myself or one of my team will reach out to you for a one-to-one in the coming days. So that's it from us for today. Thanks again to Dean Ryan of If Development, and we'll see you.
For the opportunity.
Thanks, Dean. Wonderful. I'll talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.